Exploring Reality says, question for Paulogia, why don't you like Bayes exactly?
Bayes is fine. Like it's just this arbitrariness of these probable priors, and I think that it's basically expressing in formulaic form that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, which really just means if this is something that goes against my priors, it's going to take more to get me over the hump. And so Kyle explained what his priors are. I disagree with almost every one of his priors. Like I think that everything he thinks is a high prior, I think is next to zero. So Bayes is, to me, gets you to an arbitrary number that affirms what your priors were. And that's all it does. I don't think it's a helpful tool unless you just need a number to express what you believe before you started.
I think you can get to the resurrection even if your prior is at least non-zero.
Right,
I know that's
but that's not Bayesian. Like you don't. I think you can get there, but you would agree that when your priors are low, that it takes more to get over the hump.
sure, sure. Yeah, it would take
And
more
that's why you were excited
than
when I said it was a non-zero chance, right?
yeah. I'm saying you're saying there's a chance, but
Yeah,
no,
right.
I think with a cumulative case can take a non-zero prior. It's just kind of like the illustration that I've heard is if you're taking this is a crude illustration, but it exemplifies Bayes, I guess. If you're taking a walk in a cabin and you look, by all looks of it, it looks like the Bob Ross cabin that was painted. It's totally abandoned looking. It just looks bad. Okay. And you walk in and all of a sudden you see a cup of tea steeping hot on a table in that cabin. Then that overcomes the prior of it was really low because it looks by all appearances of things like nobody's in there. But then you see that, then that one piece of evidence can switch it. And so if that's possible, then I think a cumulative case for a miracle can definitely overcome a low prior. Maybe that wasn't the most articulate, but
No, but are you saying that that is a case for Bayesian, or is that, or are you,
I still
was
think you
that a
can
case
use.
against my extraordinary claims?
Well, what I'm saying is that you can still use Bayes to get to the resurrection on a non-zero prior. You don't have to be where Kyle's at, where his prior is probably well over 50 or more before he even gets to the evidence.
It's not that high, by the way, but it's definitely higher than Paulogia's, so I'll mention
Do
that.
But you would agree that, or I shouldn't say would you, actually, would you agree that Bayes is largely a quantification of an arbitrary?
Yeah, yeah, I think and that's typically used as an argument against Bayes, like, why should we even use this if it's just arbitrary? I think it's just a useful way of yeah, it's all subjective ultimately at the end of the day, right? But it's a useful way of, like, actually quantifying it, so to speak. So, yeah.
Yeah, so that's why I don't like it. Gives the artifice of quantifiability when it is
Yeah,
really
if you look at, like, Richard Carrier's thing, it's like, oh, well, the Bayes of the priors of Jesus existing is, like, super, super low, and so, like, no historical evidence, at least the historical evidence we have for Jesus existing is not gonna overcome that prior. I think that's when it becomes arbitrary. I think that's when people will sort of, like, misuse it, so to speak.
Doesn't Lydia
I'm against when Carrier does it too. Just sorry, I didn't mean to
Yeah,
step on
yeah.
the register.
well, it doesn't that's what I was gonna say, like, I think Lydia also does it in her book. So, like, it's this tool that's used by various people that I think are coming at it subjectively to paint the picture that maybe I'm jumping a little on the gun here, that want
They
their
use Bayes
conclusions to be
no, I would not say that at all. Because what they're saying is that the evidence can overcome a very low prior. They don't think that the prior is necessarily low. They're setting the prior as low to the floor as possible and saying, even with a very low prior, we believe that the case can overcome the low prior. That's what they're saying. And
so, like, I'm saying, like, imagine
it's not a bunch of just garbage in, garbage out kind of thing.
well, imagine I called to Richard Carrier right now because he's big into the Bayes thing. I've got his telephone number and I say, "Hey, Richard, can you using Bayes, can you show why like it doesn't work for the resurrection or like dealing with the same material that let's say is being used by Lydia, he draws a completely opposite conclusion and says that it doesn't work, it isn't going to fit or something. Would it be because he's drawing on other material or are we only working with the 27 New Testament books? You know, like what is it? Would it be limited on what we're actually using to input into the calculator, so to speak, to draw our conclusions or
I haven't read Carrier enough to know what he's putting in there. So somebody else who's familiar with Carrier would have to answer that question. I don't really know. I've heard a lot of criticisms of Carrier, but I don't
But
know
Eric,
what he's putting all into that.
to tied back to the question, if you heard Richard Carrier, use the Bayes formula to come up with an 80% chance that Jesus didn't exist, you're not going to say, oh, the real life hard number for Jesus existing is 80%, right? You'll know in your head that there were assumptions in that number.
I would look at the arguments that why is he giving us that number in the first place?
Right,
Where's
right.
the data coming from?
But that's why where you and I think it just all comes back to you and I agree. It's the arguments that go into it that are interesting,
Sure.
not the
Yeah.
number that gets spit out at the end.
Yes. Yeah, we're good.